everyone, and welcome back to the Wenite YouTube channel. I am Jennifer Adama, and I'm the founder of Wenite. And interestingly, today I'm not your interviewer, so we've got our guest Adama with us today, who has a really interesting story of how we both got to be on this video together. So we will be co-interviewing. So super excited about that. So with that, Adama, maybe I'll ask you to introduce yourself.
So hi everyone, my name is Adama. Thank you, Jennifer, for introducing me. I would describe myself as a life science blogger, first and foremost for this platform, and then life science careers blogger, science communicator, and all-round science human, science enthusiast. I just love talking about science and like everything around it. So my journey essentially started in undergrad, where I did medical physiology, moved on to a master's where I did medical ultrasound in like the hospital clinical space. And then I moved on to like a more lab setting, doing as a research technician in like a biomedical imaging lab. And then I've now kind of moved to like background operations in science for a bit. So I think I've really explored like my different interests, and I've really enjoyed doing that. I've also interviewed Jennifer for my blog. And I think what I've learned from her profile is the other side of that the science industry can offer you. So the background pharma, the operations that really gets things running, the people that know what to do and telling the doctors like, hey, do that, or all the people that kind of do things and then making sure there's a clear structure. So yeah, tell me more about you.
Oh yeah, pretty cool. And so I guess for me, a little bit like you, a science enthusiast, even though I feel like I've kind of transitioned into the less front-facing end of science and more to the background to kind of support the operations of it. But I kicked off, I think, with a degree in biosciences. And then the journey went from the bioscience degree. I did a year in the lab as a lab technician, whilst I was also doing my dissertation. And then after doing that year in the lab, I transitioned into industry straight away after graduating. But I started working for a small clinical research organization, and they did phase 1 clinical trials. And so I was in that organization for nearly 2 years. But in that time, because it was phase 1 trials, they had a clinic, they had labs, they had a pharmacy. So they had a little bit of everything. So that gave me an opportunity to kind of do different types of roles. So I still got to do a little bit of the lab stuff, and I got to do clinical things, which was really, really new. What was really cool though, whilst I was working in that company, is I got to meet loads of healthcare professionals. So like pharmacists and doctors and other scientists and PhD holders and people with business degrees. And I was really confused about how all these different people were working in the same place and what they were aiming to deliver. So as I started to learn a bit more about people's personal stories, I started to realize that you could kind of do anything. So when people said you could really apply science, I mean, everyone was literally applying science in their own way. So I thought it was really cool. So after exploring a number of roles in that clinical research organization, I realized that we delivered a lot of contracts for loads of big pharma, is what people, I guess, were calling them. So like big pharmaceutical companies like GSK or Johnson & Johnson and Pfizer. And I was like, okay, well, what's going on there? And at what point did they make a decision that we want to give this company this contract to help us to do this? And so I was like, I want to find out a little bit more about that. And so that's what led me to start looking at opportunities in that setting. And that's how I ended up in my current company, which is MSD. And within MSD in the UK, I started joining their clinical research organization, so where they do clinical development. So it was still clinical research, but now they focused a little bit on the phase 3 trials. So this is with patients that are actually diagnosed with the set disease that we're researching. So that was what was really different, because previously I had been working directly with patients that were healthy, even though we were kind of researching within like a particular disease area. The other difference is that I realized that when you also work directly for the pharma companies, you're not necessarily front line with the patients, which I was with my previous job. So with this one, you're kind of, you're liaising with the people that might have worked in like the company I worked for before, or with the NHS, and they're the ones who are front end. So your role is just to be that like in-between person. So you're the liaison, just making sure that they're doing things according to how the the design of the study was intended for, and making sure that it adheres to that, and then just ensuring that they are doing it compliantly with like regulation and things like that. So I did like 2 roles within clinical development. So I started off as a clinical trial coordinator, did that for about a year at MSD, and then transitioned to become a clinical research associate, which I think is quite a popular role within clinical development. So I did that role for about 2 years, which I really, really enjoyed. It was field-based, which essentially means that you are based at home, so you don't go into the office. In some companies you do, depending on the type of role, but for the one that I had, you're based at home. And that's because you have to travel quite a bit to the different NHS sites or GP sites or pharmacies where the trials might be taking place. And so it makes sense that you're kind of based in that place and you're mobile. So did that for about 2 years across a number of therapy areas, which essentially means that therapy area could mean like neuroscience, or it could be oncology, or it could be diabetes or cardiovascular. So you work within a certain therapy area. So I worked within various therapy areas, which was really interesting because for each therapy area you work in, you go into the science of it. You have to understand the science. So another thing I really loved about that job is if I worked in oncology, for example, I had to really go back to basics to be that point of contact. I had to understand the mechanism of the medicine that we're saying that we have, and how it works and how it interacts with us as humans, and how it interacts with existing drugs that are out there, and therefore what might the impact be for the patients that we're trying to serve. And so you really had to know that science, which I thought was really, really cool. And then you had to then translate that into like in a patient setting, and how do you communicate that science to people? So after doing that for around 2 years,
I'm going to pause you here because you've just described an amazing role for 2 years, and like you have an amazing experience. I'm going to pause you and let's pause on this CRA role, because I think let's both think back, I guess, to the point where we were undergrads or thinking about like that what next question, because that's kind of in my head and like where I'm going, like finding like, how do I figure out what am I going to do next? And when you've described all your amazing experiences, you've gone, I've done something for 1 year, I did it for 2 years, I did it for another 2 years. So at what point do you start thinking of that new role? Because like people, what would you advise people to say, okay, stay in a role for X amount of time so you kind of gain the most out of it before you transition? Because I think in this world where everyone's moving quick and wants to move up, what length of time do you think is ideal to stay in the role that you were at?
That's a tough question. That's a really tough question. Okay, if I'll share my reasons for the points where I felt like it was the right time to move. So I mentioned that when I came out of university, I was in my first company for about 2 years. And in that time, I think I would say I did, if I had to count, 3 different jobs in that time. And when it came to time to leave that company, what it came down to was the scope of what I was learning in the role. So in that 2 years, I think if there was an assessment, kind of like when you're doing your degree, there are competencies that you're learning across the way. So you get really good at presenting in front of people, you get good at centrifuging, you get really good at taking blood or taking ECG, or understanding that these are the things that need to happen at this time. So when it came to a competency perspective, I felt that I had started to cover most of it. And so I started to become an expert. And not to say I was the best person, because to be clear, there were really experienced people that had to teach and were still better, and you still had to lean upon for their expertise. But in terms of the scope of what I was learning, it got to the point where what next couldn't be in the same area. So it had to be something slightly different. And my personality is that I like to be challenged, and I like things that are really different. If I don't feel like I'm spinning multiple plates at once, then I don't feel like I'm pushing myself much. And then I start to become demotivated in what I'm doing. So it's nothing with the job, it's nothing with the company, it's just for me. And so when that thing starts to feel like it's a little bit stagnant, I'm like, okay, I want to do something a little bit different here. So actually, even within the company I was in, I first started wanting to consider other opportunities within the company. but the requirements for some of the other roles in the company, I didn't have them at that time. And I needed to build my experience a little bit more in those areas. But what I needed to build my experience in, that gap, the company didn't have jobs in that particular gap. So it's almost like I had to say, okay, well, I've got two options here. I can sit here and continue like this, and perhaps in the future, they might give me that development opportunity to start this job, but without necessarily having all the skills I need to do it, and maybe I'll grow in the job, but that's a if. Or I could say, I could go and get this other experience somewhere else, and maybe I could come back to this company in the future for this job, and perhaps they'll consider me then. Or maybe I might really like what I'm doing and I stay there. And that was how I made the decision the first time. So it came down to, I'm ready to move, but what I want to move to, I don't have all the necessary experience. If I stay in this role, it won't give me that experience to go to this other thing I'm really liking. And so I have to think of how else I can do that. So that was the first thought process, if that makes sense.
No, it does. I think, again, I'm quite similar in the sense I'm always looking for that. I think why I chose not to go down the path of my MSc, so becoming an echocardiographer by profession, it pays well in the NHS. I looked at the role and I was like, 5 years from now, what would I be doing? I like doing, as you said, spinning multiple plates. I like doing different things in my one role. I found that it could get very repetitive, but I think reflecting back, when I was making that decision, I was really oh my gosh, I need to do everything. I want to be really cool. I want to say I'm doing the coolest bits of science. But looking back, I think if you're a different type of person and you want stability, you want growth, you want good opportunities, but you also don't want to be pressured to do too much all the time, that is also a perfect thing. So I think, as you said, kind of identifying the type of person you are, we're both, I want to do 5 things and I'm okay doing 5 things. Some people, I want to do one thing and do one thing really well. So yeah, thank you for answering. Now you can move
on. And I think to add to that as well, every move since then has been quite similar. Luckily, in the current company I moved to, the difference is that because it's such a big company and we're global in where we're based, it's an American-based company that has affiliates or subsidiaries. Basically, they have a branch of the company in various countries across the world, and the company also covers jobs from research all the way through to marketing. And so there are so many opportunities. If it's not in the UK, it's going to be in Ireland. If it's not in Ireland, it's going to be in the US. It's going to be somewhere else. And so I think maybe the reason I've not necessarily started looking externally yet is because I have found somewhere else within the company where I can find that other thing. So whilst I've moved roles, so someone within the company might say, actually, I'm only going to do clinical development and I'm going to stay within this area, but I'll change jobs in clinical development. Someone else might say, I'm going to do sales and marketing and I'm going to stay in sales and marketing. And both of those are okay. But I guess in terms of what you said, that curiosity to learning and understanding how things are connected, that's what has been my motivation in changing. So when I went from the clinical trial coordinator role to the clinical research associate role, that was because I felt like the clinical research associate role was more connected to the science and I was feeling very separated from it. And so
can you expand just a little bit more, how are they so separate for people that don't know?
Okay, so for the clinical trial coordinator role, it was more it was a project support role. And so you're doing a lot of the coordination of things. So if you think about let's just imagine we're organizing a wedding and you've got an events coordinator. You don't need to be an expert in each of the different areas. You're not the cook, you're not the singer, you're not the dancer, but you are supporting in making sure that the coordination of all of this is efficient and so that it's delivered on time. So you don't need your expertise in any of those subjects in order for you to be successful in that. And that was what that role was about. So it was more of that outside looking in support and coordination, but not needing to be an expert in anything, which was great for my first role because that's what I needed, because I didn't understand pharma. I didn't understand how everything was connected. So actually, I'm happy that the role was the way it was because it really allowed me to do that job, deliver without too much pressure, but also start to absorb information and learn from the experts. And as I learned from the experts, that's when I realized that, okay, I like this particular area of expertise. So for example, I want to be the bar person because I like the way the person mixes drinks. And I used to, oh God, that's not a good example, is it? I used to,
an example, I think. Like, oh, yeah.
okay,
You know?
I used to like drinks. I like water. I like juice. So now I really want to get back into that, actually, because that's why I chose my degree in mixology, for example. And so I like the fact that you get to utilize elements of your degree in that. And so that's where the clinical research associate role comes from. Typically, in some countries, to be a clinical research associate, you also have to, you might have to be a medical doctor to do it. But it is actually a standard requirement that you must have a life sciences degree in the UK in order for you to be a clinical research associate. And the reason for that is because your role is so critical. You're front facing. If we step back for a second, you're talking to an oncologist that is an expert in their role. They're the leading expert for oncology in the entire UK. And you're talking to them about a rare indication in oncology, you know, for a particular disease that they've been treating. There's no current treatment that is as successful as it can be in that area. And you're the person who's going to them to say, I've got this particular thing on behalf of my company. You don't go with anybody else. You don't get to bring a doctor with you. You show up to, let's say, King's College, and you're sitting down and you're speaking to this professor, oncologist, consultant, all of the titles behind their name, and you're trying to explain that this is what we're doing, and you think that they would be a great, they tend to call them sites, but you'll be a great clinical site to participate in this research and would like to work with you. And as they start to recruit patients, you're that person that they sense check with, like, hi, Jennifer, I've got a patient in at the moment, and I think they might be eligible for this trial. I've looked at the protocol and I'm not quite sure. Are you able to let me know? And you're having to kind of look at that and get back to them really quickly or on the phone. So you can see how you need to kind of understand the science and the clinical element to do the role. So that's what brought me to that particular job. How about you? You mentioned that you obviously chose to do like the clinical bit, and then you decided that you've kind of gone into the background to do more operational stuff. So I want to dig into that a little bit.
It was honestly, so with lab roles, they kind of just end. So I have like a 1.5 to 2-year contract. So that ended nicely in December. It was like, okay. But I think I sat in that role and I was really like, okay, what do you actually want to do next? Like, you need to make a solid decision. You need to make a solid decision on what you actually want to do. So I was like, okay, you've interviewed a few people. Pharma seems interesting. This looks like a cool role. I applied for different jobs at that time because, you know, you're just applying for jobs and you just, at that point, I just wanted a job, to be honest. I was like, I need something to do. So I did a bit of psychom. I did like psychom job applications. I did like applications for like science writers, all the little things I'm interested in. And I was like, you know what? I'm gonna let God do his thing and be like, wherever you land, that's your next step. So I did see the science writing roles, and I think I started to kind of process that the type of science writer I want to be isn't the type of roles that are kind of available, because I have this thing of I really want to understand how I kind of want to give back or contribute to like Sierra Leone or African scientists, but directly, not in the way that you're a UK scientist just doing research there. Like, how do I actually really want to engage? And I was like, that's kind of where I want my psychom and science writing to be based. I don't really want it, I don't gain the fulfillment I think I would in a job role if it's solely based in the UK. So I was like, okay, science writing, you have your blog, put that down. But the clinical research role came about. I was like, okay, this looks cool. I can do this. It was very chilled. And it's like in an allergy department. And I was like, it's very different. I'm a cardiovascular babe. I'm a very like nitty gritty sciences. I was like, I know nothing about allergies. And that came about. And I think it's been for a few months now. And I've really enjoyed it. And it's given me time to also like pause. Because as you said, it's a role where you're kind of just observing everybody and what they do. And you're kind of just like, yep, you have a question, I'm gonna answer it. Okay, you have a question, I'm gonna answer it. And I think it's just been a very good pause moment for me to kind of evaluate what I want. Like, do I want to go further into science, or do I kind of want to move like you're going, or go down that path? So I think that's how I've ended up here. Yeah.
That's pretty cool. I didn't even realize that when you described it earlier, you said, yeah, just moved into something new. And, so I'm going to pause you too and talk a little bit about when you say, it's a little bit of, it gives you an opportunity to pause and see the different things that are happening. Tell me a little bit more about that. What are you seeing?
So I'm very much like, it's an allergy department. They have whatever what am I going to call them? whatever the sponsors are trying to do and whatever drug they're trying to treat and how they're trying to deal with the patient. So my role is essentially to make sure everything's entered properly, also liaise with the nurses, be with the doctors, and then there's an overall study coordinator because it's like NHS trials and then commercial trial side, and I'm on the commercial trial side. So it's quite interesting, like one, just learning that this role even exists and there's something to do within that. And then, as you said, the science bit, it's been a challenge because it's like I have to learn about all these allergy protocols and what like little things and acronyms mean. And like the nurse will come up to me like, oh yeah, Adama, are we supposed to do this? And I'm like, oh, for the first week, I was like, I don't know what you're saying to me. You're going to have to pause. I'm going to have to write this down and I'm going to have to learn. So it's been a learning curve in that sense. The sciencey part, like they do these thing called like open label food challenges where you'll mix up peanut products and you'll give it to the patient. So that sciencey bit, I get to contribute, mix up some peanut, help the dietitian. So in terms of seeing different roles, I've seen like what a clinical research dietitian does. I did not know that was a thing. Don't know why my brain didn't think it was a thing. I've also kind of seen the type of people that get into this role, which was, I think, this has been like a really good pause for me to kind of evaluate job plus person, because I've always kind of put them together. Like I am a science human. I should be breathing, living, doing everything science. My job should be so fulfilling to everything I want to do in science. But we are like these multifaceted humans. Like your job is not going to be your everything. So seeing like the different people that take these roles, a lot of the people I work with are moms. They really love it. You can have it part-time. It's quite flexible. I get to work from home. I get to do my nails at this job. It's literally like so little things that I was like, oh yeah, this is kind of important to me. I kind of like having my nails done here and there in the lab. I can't do that for like the entire year, maybe 2 weeks in the year. So just kind of breaking down what I feel is important to me in a role and then being like, okay, how can this actually contribute to the future Adama, what she wants to do later, which is pending. It's in the process. I think I'm slowly piecing what that means for me.
That is so cool. I am so happy that this is where I got to like learn a little bit more and find out a bit more. And as you kind of share that as well, I think it reminded me of the experience that I had in my first company. Not in the exact same way, because I only had worked as a lab technician at my university as well. So I hadn't worked in any other roles in any other environments that were STEM based, apart from my 2-week work experience in year 10 at a GP. But apart from that, yeah, yeah. And so yeah, it's really cool hearing you have that experience and what it ends up being. So I'm happy we've captured it in a moment in time, so we can come back and see what that looks like in the future.
Yeah.
I think just to kind of round up my piece, I think after the clinical bit and talking all about the science, you would kind of assume that I've continued in like clinical development. But then in that 2 years, I started doing a lot of exploratory stuff. I started exploring who I am as a person. I had been working at this point for about 4 years, and I started to understand, like as you said, there's the science, there's the job, there's you as a person. And I felt like I kept segmenting all of those people. And so in that 2 years in that role, at the same time, I started to try and evaluate like, who am I and where do I actually want to go? Because I don't want to do things because I think it's the right thing to do. I really want to do what I enjoy and what's 100% me. And so I went to lots of like events and networking sessions. I did some personal coaching. And so out of that, I started to feel like I was a little bit more confident in myself and what I liked and what value I felt like I could give, and where I'm being honest about where I wanted to learn more. And so I decided that with the stuff I do with Wenite, I really enjoy it. So I was like, okay, I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't know what I can do with it now because I can't quit my job and do this full time. But I understood that there were elements of the role that I felt like I wanted to explore further. And so I wanted a role that allowed me to step back and understand our industry holistically. Just the same way what Wenite is trying to do is to get people to see the variety of roles within STEM. I wanted to understand most of the roles and how pharma actually connects together. So whilst I worked in clinical development, I understood that there were people in the commercial business, in the manufacturing business, in the research business, and I didn't know what they did. And so I wanted a role that would allow me to be able to understand that And that was the role that I have at the moment, which is the Chief of Staff job. So I had the opportunity to get the Chief of Staff job for our Managing Director for the UK and Ireland, who in some companies would be known as sort of like the General Manager, but they kind of oversee the company in its entirety, but you already have leaders in the separate divisions or departments that do what they do. And so it's just a really privileged position to be able to say, oh, okay, so this is when the person from the discovery chemistry side connects with the person in manufacturing design and the person in commercial and regulatory affairs and all the rest of it. So in the last nearly 2 years now in doing the role, that's what I've been able to be exposed to and to learn. And that's just given me a completely different perspective on everything. And that's where I'm at today. And that's the journey.
I love it. I love it. I think what I love is like our similarities in terms of like, we really want to know like the different things and like how everything fits together. And I guess what, that's why I have a blog that explores careers, and that's why you also do the video side of it, and like literally just very, very similar things. I think to kind of round up slowly. So why is sharing your journey on Wenite important to you? Because you share a lot of people's journeys. Why is sharing your specific journey important to you?
Oh God, I didn't want to share my journey. Oh my goodness, well, I think it's important that it's another career path and it's another perspective. And if I'm saying that it's important for people to understand that there are diverse paths that they can take, then I don't think I should keep that information away from people. And maybe there are people out there like yourself and myself who have that slightly different perspective and are really curious to learning and wanting to try out different things. And if anyone has that jittery feeling inside and thinking, oh, I don't know if I could say this out loud, then it's okay, because we're doing it and we're getting through and we're still experiencing. And so I hope that if someone kind of listens and learns from this journey, it's that's okay to take the scenic route, to try and figure out what you like and what you're about. So I hope that it adds to that catalogue of stories.
Yeah, you've said a quote that I feel like since your event, if people have not watched or been tuned in, like make sure you're paying attention to the Wenite STEM events, because amazing. Again, that quote has like stuck in my head for the rest of my life, taking the scenic route. So I think, what is next for you in terms of like career progression? What's next for you in terms of Wenite? And how do you see all of it coming together? Or is it together for you now? Like, are you at a good place with it as well?
I think I'm getting to a good place. I think I'm coming to a point where Wenite is becoming part of my professional identity, and my professional identity is becoming part of my personal identity. And that's a really comfortable place. And I hope that that continues. And what that simply means is when I introduce myself at work, this is what I do, but I'm also really passionate about STEM and about people and about society, and how I try to contribute towards that is to help others. And so sometimes in conversations, that's how I've managed to get people to do an interview, because they also care about people and they care about others. And so they say, actually, I'd be really happy to share my journey if it will help someone. So I think that's something I want to continue to not separate, but keep together. And then I think in terms of the future roles, once you've seen how everything comes together, it's really tough. But some of the things that I think I'm passionate about that I want to continue is, as I said, like the patient part is really important to me. So I'm glad for the experience to see everything holistically, but now I want to kind of roll my sleeves up and say, okay, now which of these departments can I like get in, and hopefully they can gain some value from the experience I've had to date to help patients again. But also with people, like, can I help others? Can I mentor people? Like, what can I do? So if the job has those elements in it, then I think I'll be really, really excited about that. How about you?
Oh, for me, how is it going to round up? I think I have a question for you to kind of help me, because I think I'm in a place where I still categorize like the things I do, and it's still hard for me to be like, oh yes, I do a blog or TCIM. Sometimes it's a bit awkward for me still. I do not know why, and I need to really work on it. So I think my question was for you, like, how did you get to that place of kind of, because I guess as maybe Black people, you kind of want to like categorize, like present a certain version of yourself at work. and then you kind of don't want them to know everything else that you do behind the scenes, because I guess sometimes that's what we're told, like just be you at work and leave the personality at home, basically. So how have you felt comfort in just being you and like not really overthinking all of it? Because I guess it could be down to your workplace as well and them nurturing that environment for you, but just to help me answer the question.
That's a good question. And I would start with that. The workplace is a good environment for that. I think I've been lucky in that my organization is really progressive in their thinking. But as well as that, the first company I worked for was really diverse. When I say it was really diverse, there were Black people, people of Asian descent, people of Japanese descent. And so I remember going to work and everyone had to be themselves. And so for the first 2 years of my career, I didn't have to be somebody else. And that was a really good environment to be in. When I came into a bigger corporate organization, that's slightly different because, like I said, people are based in different countries, etc. One of the things that I think really helped me in two ways is in my company, there's something called an employee business resource group, which are EBRGs or ERGs in some companies. And this is basically where if you're a marginalized group or underrepresented, you can create a smaller community that helps then the organization put structures in place to help you feel more included. And so that was something that I became a part of at my current company, and I co-lead that as well. And then externally, I joined loads of networks that already had that. So groups like WOSIP, Women of Color in Pharma, I think Black Pharma now as well. So just networks that there are other people like you, and it starts to make you feel really comfortable and that you're able to bring your whole self to work. So that's been a bit of me.
Love it. I love it. Thank you for your time. This has been so good. And I'm happy we've both had the time to like sit down and do this and like really talk. Maybe there'll be a part 2.
Yeah, maybe there will be.